Taoiseach, just a year ago, the very sad death of Jonathan Corrie sparked a huge outcry across the country and indeed in Dáil Éireann, which was followed by a series of crisis meetings on homelessness and housing, followed by declarations from government that definitive interventions will be made to reverse the trend and to improve the situation. But 1 year on, Taoiseach, those at the coalface, working at the coalface, those on the streets, are very clear about one thing, Taoiseach. The homeless crisis has deepened and has got actually worse in the 12 months since the sad death of Jonathan Corrie. And those on the streets know that the government's interventions and government policy has failed to halt the deepening crisis. The number sleeping rough in Dublin is on the increase. It's on the increase in Cork, Limerick, Waterford, Galway and across the country. And in the last number of years, Taoiseach, and I pointed this out to you in the House time after time, the most shocking phenomenon and development of recent years has been the number of families with children losing their homes on an ongoing basis. It's been most shocking and distressing to many. There are now about 800 families with over 1,500 children who have been made homeless, essentially. About 70 to 80 families a month losing their homes, as opposed to 30 to 40 last year. And one of the key issues over the last year has been the rent issue, increasing rents, up by about 30% in this city alone, and many families losing their homes because they could not pay the increasing rents.
Thank you.
And the most simplest of interventions would have assisted at that stage. Rent supplement, Taoiseach, needs to be increased. The government's intervention has been too little too late, and there's no sense of urgency or joined-up thinking, whether it is dealing with your plan for social housing, which will be about 1,000 houses short before the end of this year, 3,000 vacant units across the country.
Thank you.
Local authority units still not ready for housing, 3,000. And NAMA, no mandate for social housing or delivering any. So, Taoiseach, the question I have to put to you is this: will the government change its position and agree to increase rent supplement? And secondly, will NAMA be directed to build social housing as opposed to private housing?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that we shouldn't confuse the situation insofar as rough sleepers are concerned on the streets and the question of homelessness in general. There is a difference in the situation that applies on the streets. Now, obviously, the fundamental problem here is supply of accommodation, be it private accommodation, social accommodation, voided units or whatever. People are entitled to have access to warm, comfortable, properly insulated accommodation, and that's not been the case. A great deal of work has gone into dealing with this, and quite a deal of progress has been made. Clearly, the supply problems are the crux here. There's been a targeted development contribution rebate scheme in Dublin and in Cork, new apartment guidelines to improve the viability of this type of development are contained in the new bill, which we'll go through this week. There are legislative amendments in there to increase the flexibility to deal with the supply of housing in the strategic development zones. The Ireland Strategic Investment Fund will support the delivery of housing-related infrastructure in large-scale areas to also deal with the question of supply. And NAMA aims to deliver 20,000 residential units before the end of 2020. The government, as you know, Deputy, increased the current allocation for social housing by a further €69 million to €414 million, and that funding will enable local authorities to secure accommodation for an additional 14,000 households. It's not as if they haven't been given instructions or facilities or finance to do it. And also the current allocation for emergency accommodation for homeless people has been increased by €17 million, and that will bring the Exchequer support to €70 million, which is up 56% since 2014. Now, on top of that, for your information, There's the funding for 35,000 new social housing units to be developed by the state. The state will build these. A new vacant site levy will be introduced to compel developers sitting on serviced and zoned land in in-demand areas to develop their sites. Reduced development contributions in the Dublin area, because this was a real problem with contractors, and a reduction in Part 5 planning obligations. Now, last week I went down to the Digital Hub to see the new development that's down there by Dublin City Council. I think this intervention will be very significant for rough sleepers, with up to 150 beds available in pristine quarters, where when the person goes into that building, they're first of all met courteously and properly, but they're also registered. The facilities available for a doctor and a nurse, proper food available for them, registration and an individual locker for each person. Their clothes and their garments that will be taken away and washed. They have really good facilities in accommodation, where there are beds both for males and females, and obviously potential to expand that if necessary. I think that the intervention by the City Council in this particular regard is going to be commended, and obviously should mean that there should be no rough sleepers on the street in Dublin this Christmas. Now, I can't speak, Deputy Martin, for every individual person, some of whom want to be on the streets and are in very particular circumstances. In regard to the issue of families becoming homeless because of the rent increases, obviously rent stability has been brought to this area by the decision of the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Finance. That bill will be through this week, the Residential Tenancies Bill, which provides a degree of stability to this sector. And obviously the situation insofar as the voided units being returned has been operating successfully. I understand there are some objections to modular housing being put in place for 22 families, where there'll be warm, decent and comfortable accommodation for them. All of these matters are part of what the government is concerned with. There's no intention of increasing the rent subsidy. You have to deal with the supply question, and in individual cases, Cancora, the Department of Social Protection do provide assistance for dealing with each individual case where that's brought to their attention.
Deputy Martin.
Taoiseach, I'd ask you two simple questions. Will the government increase rent supplement? You gave the answer at the end of a very long reply full of the best intentions, but very little delivery on the ground. Because you talk to Threshold, you talk to FLAC, you talk to Simon, you talk to Focus Ireland, you talk to the Peter McVerry Trust, talk to anybody involved in dealing with families, and they will say the rent supplement was a key issue. It was a key issue 12 months ago, Taoiseach. You talk about rent or stability being brought to that issue. What was going on for the last 12 months? Rents have gone up 30%. Families who couldn't afford to pay those rents lost their homes, Taoiseach, because you did not intervene, because Minister Kelly did not intervene. There was a row going on between Michael Noonan, Minister Noonan and Minister Kelly. A full 12 months. What went on to 12 months before that?
Question, please.
We've been pointing out to the Minister, to the Taoiseach, and to yourselves about rent supplement. Because of a right-wing market ideology, or to the extent we can't interfere, you allowed families to lose their homes, Taoiseach. That is an undeniable reality.
Question, please.
And the case-by-case approach simply has not worked, because the problem has got worse. If we had a case-by-case scenario working, well, what was 30 to 40 families losing their homes 12 months ago wouldn't be 70 to 80 families losing their homes now. It's absolutely a disgrace that you allowed a problem become a crisis through inaction and not intervening earlier enough, and not having a proper, clear solution. The second question I asked you, Taoiseach, was, would you direct NAMA to build social houses? You're saying NAMA will build 20,000 houses in the private market. There is a social dividend provided for in the legislation that established NAMA. And surely, if it's the supply is, and we all agree the supply is an issue, then why not direct NAMA to start building social houses to deal with what is now a crisis that you have allowed to escalate for lack of intervention and an acknowledgement that there was a problem. You guys thought there was no problem a couple of years ago, and you allowed it to get to the stage where it has got to now.
Sorry, Deputy, I have to ask you to resume your seat. Taoiseach.
The families who've lost their homes in the last 3 years has been one of the most shocking phenomenon and trends in the homelessness issue, Taoiseach. Everybody has agreed on that. What's shocking equally has been the inaction in relation to it, and Minister Kelly has not, in my view, stabilised the situation by any manner of means. Or given
See, you have an allegiance to a particular philosophy that was always the hallmark of your party and government, which was in the main responsible for what happened in the last number of years. You want to throw money at every problem. Now, if you decide to increase the rent subsidy, that does not improve the supply of housing by 1 unit. Not 1 unit. It merely puts more pressure. No. It merely puts more pressure. It puts more pressure on the existing housing stock.
Deputy, thank you.
And it makes the situation worse. And that's why on an individual
Sorry, would you please?
That's why on an individual basis, thousands of families have been helped through the individual circumstance where the rent subsidy can be increased. But your proposition will not supply 1 extra house for 1 extra family. Not one. Now, the government have put $4 billion on the table for social housing out to 2020. Minister Kelly and Minister Coffey around the country with chief executives of local authorities where social housing is to be built. NAMA have contractors and land. There's a need for private housing. Every time, Deputy Martin, a new facility is announced for Dublin or for anywhere else, there's a need for accommodation. And NAMA are contracted will build 20,000 houses and open 100 sites in 2016. And that's private housing for which there's a need also, because it deals with the issue of the supply of housing stock. You don't seem to recognise that.